Welcome to Phoenix Rising with Dr. Z. This podcast is all about conversations about healing and rising from the ashes of your grief and trauma. I'm your host, Dr. Christina Zampitella. It is my sincere hope that this podcast is going to give you the words and the understanding to help you heal through your grief and trauma. Hey there, everyone.
Phoenix Rising
Welcome.
with
This is
Dr.
Dr. Christina Zampitella with Phoenix
helps,
Rising with Dr.
subscribe and
Z.
share it with someone
I am
who needs it.
really,
We'll see you next time.
I've been looking forward to this topic ever since I've met Dr. Levin. I think the topic of traumatic grief is one that is misunderstood, and it's one that's overlooked often. And we are, I was blessed and lucky enough to meet her during a conference back in a couple of months ago, back in August of 2025, in case you're all looking back at this, at a different date. And we sat down and we were talking, and then I just fell in love with her immediately and was really excited to hear all that she's doing. And then I come to find out she has her own podcast. She's doing all the things. So what I do know is that she's an internationally known expert in traumatic grief. And not only does she do research and she does education and she's engaged in so many different aspects of the world of traumatic grief. And I have a lot to learn today. I am sure of that. And if I read to you her bio, we would be here for an extra amount of time that I wouldn't be able to do her background justice. So I'm going to let her give you her background and let her introduce all of the things that she's doing. And I want you to tell everybody about all the things you're doing, about your book, about your online course, and everything that you're willing to share. So welcome. I bumbled around there at the beginning, but whatever. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. And introduce us to you. Who are you?
Wow, well, what an introduction. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, that was terrible. Go ahead.
It's such a pleasure to be here, and it was such a pleasure to spend that time with you in August and get to know you. And I actually got to hear you speak back at the ADAP conference in New Mexico earlier this year. And so
right.
I love when I get to meet new people and professionals who care about the same things that I do. And so it's just a bright spot in my day. Oh. So I'm a traumatic grief therapist. I'm licensed to practice in both the state of Washington and California, and specialize in sudden and unexpected death, working with individuals and families in my private practice, Therapy Heals. And then I also have a consulting business called Traumatic Grief Solutions, where we work with business leaders, ideally in proactive planning, preparing ahead for unexpected death and trauma in the workplace, or crisis response when it happens. And then I'm also the author of the book, The Traumatic Loss Workbook, Powerful Skills for Navigating Grief After an Unexpected Death. And then just released a course called the Online Traumatic Loss Companion Course, Pathways for Healing Grief. All the titles start to come together after a while. I was going to say,
you've got so much going on that you can't even keep it straight. You're starting to sound like me.
Yeah, but the course is really great because I get to narrate the book, and there's videos from other individuals who are living with traumatic grief and other health professionals as well, because it can be really hard sometimes to take everything in a book. So those are passion projects of mine. So
how do you not be, I'm jumping way ahead, but I'm hearing you talk about what you're doing. And one of the things that often happens to therapists is, vicarious traumatization, where we're being traumatized by the stories of the trauma of the people that we're trying to help, right? I mean, it's an occupational hazard. I can only imagine, like, I know as a grief and trauma specialist, that's one thing, but when you're really engaged in, like, your big thing is like traumatic grief, where there is not like a normative grieving process case that you're working with, but you've got somebody who's telling you horrific details. Mm-hmm. I'm going to want to ask you all about how the hell do you take care of yourself through all of that?
Well, I just came back from 10 days, which I have not done in 15 years, 10 days of hiking in Quebec City. And
Wow.
the colors at this time of the year were just phenomenal. But I try and practice what I preach. Not always the best, but taking a time out. I actually moved from Southern California to Whidbey
Huh.
Island in the middle of the pandemic because it was like I want to live somewhere beautiful, and life is short. Given the population I work with, never know when something's going to happen.
Hmm.
And I was like, I'm not going to wait till I retire. I'm going to do it now. So I'm not one who waits a week to apologize. I'm going to do it now. We never know how much time we have. And so it just kind of shaped the way I live my life, the way I think about things. And at times it does get difficult, but my boundaries have gotten better over the years. And I also feel so lucky and blessed in the work that I do. The individuals that I work with have really let me in during the most vulnerable times. And for the most part, I work with my clients for probably 2 to 3 years
Hmm.
sometimes. And then I get to see the growth and the change. And so, not, they may come in during these really dark moments, and that pain doesn't go away, but new experiences and moments of joy and creating meaning in life and other things, there's room for that as well. And so, getting to see more than just raw pain and trauma
Hmm.
is also very fulfilling for me.
I think I don't know about you, but one of the things that it's like I feel honored that somebody would trust me enough to
Mhm.
companion them through.
Yeah,
And not that there's an end, there's an integration maybe, but uh, even thinking about my own traumatic losses, I think about how much space they
yeah,
took up, especially at the beginning, and then learning how to live around it and with it, and then it shifting and changing over time, which I want to dive all
yeah,
into that. What let me I'm going to backpedal because I took you down the wrong path, not wrong path, different path here, but I would like to know a little bit about like what got you into this work? Why traumatic grief?
yeah. Well, I took a long, um, not linear route, which is not surprising considering grief isn't linear. When I was a child, I was a really serious child. While my friends were playing Barbie, I was inside and reading and thinking about the seriousness of life. Like, why are we here? What's our purpose? I was kind of a nerd as a little one. And I started volunteering at a nursing home when I was in high school. And I had this really active great grandmother who swore like a sailor and was a real vibrant part of my life. And I was in this nursing home and seeing all these older adults just like sitting there and lifeless and wondering, like, wait a minute, how come
Uh-huh.
I have this great grandmother in my life who was just really excited about life, and then I'm seeing these older adults who I felt like were just like left to die. And when I went to college, my very first year, I went to UC Santa Cruz. Was I took the sociology of death and dying, and I was like all over that. So here I was, just a freshman, and we talked all about like, and this was a long time ago in the 80s. And it was all about, death and dying and why society's so afraid of death and growing old. And I was hooked. I didn't know what I was going to do at the time, but I knew that it was going to have something to do with death and dying. I got my doctorate in public health, but the National Cancer Society paid for everything as long as I had a career that had to do with cancer. And so my research looked at communication about death and dying that between women with metastatic breast cancer and their oncologists. So that's what I got into. And that was kind of the first part of my career. And then I decided, I'm too much of a people person to be in research. So I kind of left there after being at UCLA for a really long time and doing research. And I went in and I ran a hospice and did
You went
hospice.
from research to I'm just going to run a hospice.
Yep, and it was like a volunteer hospice, and a lot of people don't know about the volunteer hospice model. They were actually here. We were here first before the medical hospices, and they were provided psychosocial care only across the
Oh,
U.S. before the Medicare hospices came about. And so I ran one of those, and then I decided I want to be a therapist. So, because one of the things I did at UCLA was I worked on a lot of interventions, and I did a lot of the therapeutic, in the randomized control groups, I did a lot of the working with the clients, working under a psychologist.
mm,
So, working with cancer patients and all of that. So I went back and decided, okay. So I worked, I was a health educator at a university during the day, had my son, and I was going back to school at night. So, I
and you
want to
went
do
back to
that,
school to
get my license. Yep.
okay.
Get my
And
master's in psychology. And
okay.
so I'm going to do grief. I want to be a grief therapist. And so that's what I decided to do. And then this group of like younger people found me that had had these traumatic deaths, and there were no services. And, they couldn't go into the support group with somebody who had been with their spouse for 50 years who died naturally. They had just, the circumstances were so different.
Mhm.
So I started kind of back in LA at the time, which was the first traumatic grief group. And it just filled, and I ran it, and then I kept doing more and more. And then I got phone calls from businesses. Hey, we just lost somebody. Could you come out and support us? And it just grew. And that just became my specialty. So I got a passion for it. They found me, and I found them, and it was like a match. So just like I said, it was a very indirect path, but it was a really great fit.
But it built upon itself
Mm-hmm. It
along
showed
the
it
way. Like,
along the way.
you had bits and pieces that were occurring from, I
Yeah,
mean, from your own even personal
yeah,
experience, and then
yeah.
the interest that came from a sociological perspective, which I've always found really fascinating about how they look at it from that perspective versus a psychological perspective. But, and then moving into research, but then as you're doing research, here you are more of a people person, and you're doing these interventions, but they're kind of controlled, and they're not organic, where you're able to sit down and have that flexibility. It's like, I've got a protocol, these things, I have to try these, interventions and see what happens. And then I'm just going to take a left-hand turn here and go run a hospice, run a hospice, go back to school. Now you're being found to do these traumatic grief groups. People found you. You were out there. Well, I did not realize one of the first groups for traumatic grief were in you say LA?
Well, the ones that I started, yeah, there wasn't anything
There wasn't
around.
anything.
Yeah. And during that
That
time, my grandfather, it was interesting. I was pregnant, and my grandfather was dying from cancer. He didn't get to see me graduate. He was the closest person in my life. My great
Oh,
grandmother
okay.
died, and so it was like I was watching one life come in, one life go out, and just kind of all of this stuff happened
Mm,
at the same time. So it's just a kind of an important time in my life, and I just decided this is really what I wanted to do. And so I work a lot with individuals in their 30s, 40s, now 50s, 60s, but just one day they wake up, life is going one way, and then there's a phone call, a knock on the door, and all of a sudden everything changes.
everything so quickly.
Yeah.
I want to dive into that, but I want to give you some uh, head nod also to thank you for doing the work that you've done
Um,
in oncology. And I know it because I had, I'm still getting treated for leukemia, but in remission. But I will say that that's been traumatic. And I've talked about, and I won't make this about me, but I just want to share this with you. I was just interviewing. And did you meet Angela uh, Dean? Do you remember her? She does the Broken Pack. She the podcast. She was at the PI Institutes. Um, I don't know if you met her or not.
No, yeah.
Anyway, she and I were talking a lot about, because she was in oncology as well. She did oncology work as well. And I was telling her about how I get afraid if I feel like I need a nap in the middle of the day. Because one of the main things that showed up for me with
Okay.
the leukemia was that for like 3 weeks before I went and I got my knee replacement and then was told 4 days later I had leukemia, I was exhausted. Like I would come home, I could not even open up my eyes. And so now, even though I know I'm in remission, I just got my bone biopsy that came back and, MRD negative, like all of the good things.
Yeah.
To this day, if I feel tired in the middle of the day, I start getting freaked out. It's still
Right.
traumatic.
Yeah.
It's still traumatic. So in that way, it blindsided me and changed
Absolutely.
everything. And then the whole process has absolutely been traumatic. So there's traumatic loss, and then there's traumatic, like, I don't know, but would you agree that in
Absolutely.
cancer work, there's a lot of trauma?
I've probably lost 6 or 7 family members to cancer.
Oh, wow.
Um, and my dad's been diagnosed with cancer, luckily doing well. My sister, luckily doing well. But it's really very prevalent in my family. And I still have probably 25% of my clients with cancer. So absolutely, it's incredibly a difficult and very anxiety provoking and traumatic experience.
Yes,
So
agreed.
absolutely agree.
So thank you for doing that. And uh, that's a lot of family members to be
It
navigating
is.
the loss. I've
It
lost
is.
family to cancer too,
It
but
is.
and I'm glad that your dad and your sister are um,
Yeah, but they
doing
definitely
well.
go through those fears as well. Yeah.
And each
Yeah.
one is so different, right? Everybody's path and trajectory is so different. So, in regard, when you think about the word and the concept of unexpected or unanticipated
Hmm.
loss,
Hmm.
um, what comes to mind? Like, not only just like what you think about it, but what comes to mind emotionally that you see in people that you work with, and maybe even yourself?
Hmm. Gosh, so emotionally, when I think of the word unexpected death, it's like something where your heart, as soon as you hear about it, your heart stops. Um, Everything changes in an instant. The world you once knew is gone. You find yourself in a sea of chaos, confusion, unanswered questions, feeling just like, what am I going to do? This incredible pain. What's happened and how am I going to move forward? I mean, it's just like that first dip in a uh, but most I don't like roller coasters, but that drop. And I've
That
actually
drop.
had 2 people in my life who've experienced that. That I mean, that have died in an unexpected way. Clinically, it kind of refers to losing the death of someone you love without warning, and this is from an accident, suicide, homicide, unexpected health crisis. I see that a lot, where I came home and he was just dead on the floor, or in the workplace, somebody has a heart attack, 30s, 40s, just, overdose, natural disasters. And then I do want to mention that there are times where it's sudden, but not unexpected. And that's just as difficult. So, if somebody's had multiple suicide attempts, and you still get that phone call, and it's like, well, we always knew that one of these days they were going to be successful.
Mm,
Um, it's still like this: one minute they're there, the next minute they're gone.
hmm
But, you know, um, so it's just, but everything changes in an
What do
instant.
you? Sorry, go ahead. I
No,
interrupted
no,
you.
no, not at all.
So yeah, I never really kind of. I mean, I've seen it, but I've never kind of torn it apart the way that you're tearing it apart right now, which I think is
Mhm,
really important. Is this unanticipated but not surprising kind of thing?
mhm.
like, "Oh,
I have
yeah,
cancer. Yeah.
and then right, and then there's the shocking, horrific, out of the blue, boulder just squished me, the roller coaster, just everything shatters. Not that
Yeah.
we don't feel like the world we understood is gone, because it is, no matter what, right? No matter what loss you have, the world you understood yourself to be in is gone. That's a
Mhm.
loss as well, right? Our
Mhm.
pre-loss lives. But do you think in your own experience, personal experience, and then also maybe with, clinical experience, that there's a difference in the way people process this unexpected but not surprising kind of loss versus the unexpected and tragic, almost horrific kind of loss?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think for the one where it's like, someone being killed in an accident on the way home, or just a sudden health crisis where, there's an instant heart attack. I mean, you go into, and of course, everybody's experience is completely different, but most people will go into a shock or disbelief. Your body can't even catch up. Your mind understands what happens,
Mm,
but the rest of you can't catch up and absorb it. And that's when you hear this, I can't believe they're gone. I
mm,
can't believe that they're not going to walk through this door any minute. I'm never going to hear the sound of their voice again. So there's that rational understanding, but you just can't process, you can't get it.
mm,
Versus for somebody, we never know when we're going to die. Even if you have somebody who has been battling with cancer
mhm,
for a long time, and it may happen in the next, several weeks to a month, and then it happens the next day. It's still well, I knew the end was going to come.
mhm,
I've been preparing myself for it. I just wasn't expecting it now. But there's been
mhm,
a lot of pre grief work or anticipation or thought process, or my loved one has made 3 or 4 attempts on their life. There's been part of me that's knowing that sooner or later
mm,
this was a possibility. It's a different type of a thought process
mhm,
versus out of the blue. This never even entered my mind.
mm.
So there's a lot of psychological catch up for a scenario that you never expected to go through.
Do you feel like it's more disorganizing than if you go through we have an anticipatory grieving process, right? Which is it doesn't mean that you don't grieve, because you go through anticipatory grief, then you grieve. It doesn't take
Agree.
it away, but it's a softer landing for some people,
For some, not for
right?
everybody, but
For
for
some.
some.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Um, do you do you feel like that makes a big difference in the regard to the way that the person is grieving, and then the outcomes of their lives and the way that they're processing their grief?
And again, it's different for every single person, and also every single relationship. I mean, I think the ones that I see struggle with the most are parents who will lose a child to suicide and they had no idea.
Mm. That's the worst, you feel? Like, that's the one
They're
you see?
all they're all horrible,
Well,
but
there are
that
I mean, and
yeah,
losing a
but
child, I can't even, right?
yeah,
So,
but
but
I had absolutely no idea. And then the
mm,
guilt and the blame of like, why didn't I know? How did I miss this?
mm,
And just that rumination and those questions that are just so repetitive over and over. Those
why do
are
you think people ruminate? Does that serve a purpose?
I think it's part of the body's defense mechanism. A cope starts off as a coping mechanism,
Okay.
and then becomes a defense mechanism. Or I could be saying that backwards. I apologize if I'm not remembering which is, in one way it distracts us from the pain of accepting that it really did happen.
Mhm.
something to perseverate on.
Hmm. Do you ever? I I'm thinking about, this whole thing with prolonged grief disorder and everything that they talk about, and this whole new model that they're starting to look at it from an addiction perspective.
Mhm, mhm,
Just this is something that's been rolling around in my head because, first of all, and this is a good thing about having your own podcast. You can say whatever the hell you want, and nobody can say nothing about it. I personally think that if they can find a way to medicate something, they're going to find a way to medicate something. It's just,
mhm,
the way that it goes. With that said, I do think medications are needed sometimes. So I just want to say I'm not a hard no on that by any stretch. But if they're looking at it from an addiction perspective, from a neurobiological perspective, I look at your brain, I'm looking at the places in your brain, that light up when they do. And I won't get into all the biology about that. That the rumination is actually like a form of like a dopamine dump
mhm,
into
mhm,
the part of your brain that's like addiction. So the
mhm,
rumination
mhm,
happens as a form of an addiction. That's
mhm,
what they're, wondering about. But I I also wonder if it's a way, it's almost like the grief is what keeps you connected to the person that you've lost. So instead of having continued bond in a healthier way, the grief itself becomes the thing that links you to the person.
right, the
And then
negative
they kind of get
coping
stuck in the
yeah.
ruminative process, and then
Mhm,
the
mhm,
rumination never allows it to become part of your narrative because it never gets down into the long-term memory, and it's like keeping a phone number alive in your brain
mhm,
over and over and over again.
mhm,
And unfortunately, I don't know if I'm right about this. Tell me if I'm wrong, but those ruminations can also be extremely traumatizing.
mhm, for many, yeah. I'm not up on the addiction literature to comment
Okay.
on that with enough certainty,
Okay.
but the ruminations. There's some techniques, and that I use with clients. I call them dot stopping techniques, just on how to break rumination patterns. And I know other people have ones that they use as well, because they can, really interrupt the sleep patterns, which are incredibly important.
Hmm.
When I see sleep is probably one of the most common things that gets disrupted,
Hmm.
especially early on, and long term. And fatigue is such a long term um, symptom of
Hmm.
grief that I see over and over again. So rumination can be incredibly a difficult symptom to contain and to work with.
Mm.
But yeah, I think it's one of the body's ways of coping, something that you can focus on, something that's tangible, something that you can
Mm.
keep doing over and over. And I do talk about there are healthier ways, such as continued bonds and ways to
Hmm.
stay connected to a loved one. But I also think that the blame and the self punishment, there's something appealing about that for a lot of people.
And why would that be? Why would that be attractive?
I don't know that I have a really good response for that right now, but
Okay.
if you can blame yourself, then it gives you something to hold. I don't have a better response for that
Mhm.
at this particular moment, but
No, we can try to figure it out together. I don't know. We're
yeah,
allowed to have hypotheses, right?
yeah.
I wonder. I'm thinking about this from like a. I'm just kind of chewing on it from like a meaning reconstruction, but also about us as human beings of really being, really needing to have a cohesive narrative,
Hmm,
right? We
hmm,
have to have a story. We've from way back when, the way we passed down information from one generation to the next was being able to tell stories. So
right.
it's kind of like an old part of us is like, I want to be able to tell a cohesive story. And I think that becomes part of the way our brains are actually
Yeah.
like made. In in my experience in working with people, for example, who are survivors of homicide, there are so many places where they often can't fill in the blanks. And that becomes part of the trauma itself because they're imagining what could have been happening. Like I'd have clients say, um, did he know he was getting ready to die? Was he asking for me as his mother before he went? Is there part of this that was intentional and not really it was not a homicide? Was this, what did did they see the tree coming when he was driving the car and tried to get out of it and was terrified? And so all those unknowns that can never be filled in,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like becomes part of a problem that there cannot be a cohesive narrative.
And if you blame yourself, then
Right,
also
right.
it gives the story an answer.
There you
It
go.
ties up a loose end.
There you go.
And so I
What a
think,
shame that happens, though. And I don't mean that in a pity way, but like to blame oneself because you need to have some kind of anchor in a story that cannot have a cohesive through line, right?
mhm, mhm. And I think especially if you're a parent, we tend to take on, or a loved one, we tend to take on responsibilities that we love and for those we care for. In my book, I talk a lot about self forgiveness and compassion, self compassion. I'm a really big fan of Dr. Kristen Neff and
Mm-hmm.
her work in self compassion as a way of, you know, part of the human existence and letting go of some of the things that, we all have decisions that we've made that might not be pleased with or we wish we would have done differently. And
Mm-hmm.
so utilizing, she's got three tenets of self-compassion, self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. And so using those three components as a way of allowing yourself to get some freedom from maybe some decisions that you wish you would have done differently.
Mm. I imagine that takes quite a bit of time to get there, huh?
Absolutely. None of this is a fast process. And that's the other thing is you've got to have patience and grace with yourself for this process. This is not a fast process at all after a traumatic loss.
How do you think doing work with people with traumatic grief differs than, for example, with working with somebody who has like major depressive disorder? Like, how would that, do you know what I mean? Like the
Mhm,
trajectory of their, because
mhm,
you had mentioned, I see people for like 2 and 3 years, and I hear you, me too. I
mhm,
absolutely hear you. But we also know that there are theoretical orientations out there that are like, oh, you should be doing this, and this is the whole,
mhm, mhm,
this is the bridge that you cross, and we don't necessarily do a deep dive, but your symptoms will be better, so you won't be in
mhm,
therapy. Don't worry for 2 and 3 years
mhm,
at a time. But
mhm.
I don't know that that really allows it to give it its due diligence, so to
Mhm.
speak.